Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. I'd like to welcome Wendy Wismer. She's Associate Professor in the Food Science Division for the Department of Agriculture, Food, and Nutritional Science at the University of Alberta, specializing in sensory and consumer science. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you, Brad.
That's a mouthful in terms of who you are and what you do as a profession. Can you give us a little insight as to what sensory and consumer science is?
Sure. Well, I'm all about food, and I wonder what it is that motivates people to choose the foods that they do. And I break that down into sort of 2 different areas. One is about the taste and smell of the food and the texture and the appearance. You know, how does that motivate us and what are our perceptions? And then the other one would be around our perceptions of the attributes of the food. So whether it's healthy, natural, lean, you know, how do those motivate us and interest us? And how do we balance those with the taste and flavor?
Yeah, I think hunters deal with that on a regular basis when they have different game meat that they try to introduce to family, friends, or other people. They're turning them into guinea pigs, and sometimes there's preconceived notions about what things are.
Yes, absolutely. Our expectations are really influential. So even when we have people come into our little sensory testing facility and we've told them, well, we're going to evaluate this particular food product, even if they haven't evaluated that product before, they bring with them a variety of expectations and they start to make some assumptions and they have perceptions about what it's all going to be like. So you can never honestly get somebody to try something different with an absolute blank slate, you know, with just a clean, open mind. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. So does the power of suggestion, if you come in thinking that, a specific food is going to be salty or greasy or something, does it then become that? Is the power of suggestion that strong, or can they still differentiate between things?
Well, that's a very good question. So I'm going to say both because I think both are true. I think that there are people who, you know, if you told them, oh, well, game meat is, it always tastes gamey and it has these different sensory attributes, then they would perceive that in the sampling. Right. But I think there are other people who would maybe be a bit more contemplative and think about it a bit more and be willing to disagree with you and say, well, you know, I didn't perceive that. I found it to have these other taste qualities instead. So perhaps a little bit of both, but I think that power of suggestion is very, very strong.
That's very interesting to me because I still occasionally get to try different types of wild game. I've, all the regulars in Alberta, moose, elk, deer, waterfowl, but I've been up north and I've tried, everything from caribou to muskox to bear and everything else. And it's, for myself, I have an open mind. I don't have a preconceived notion because I've eaten so much wild game that everything's a little bit different and you're looking for I don't think the similarities, but the uniqueness of it.
That sounds like a very healthy perspective, actually. I think most people wish that their children thought like that
right.
when they introduce new foods. But yes. I think that's part of it. So you have this rich food experience that you bring with you and a really open mind. And one of the things I notice, especially when I'm teaching, is that not all students have that. So if you have this very limited food experience, and perhaps you were a fussy eater growing up and you narrow down your meat selection choices to just a couple, only chicken breasts and only a couple other things, then it does become more difficult to embrace what is unique and unusual and different.
Or even, could you go as far as say, embrace things that have more flavor?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think that's the fly in the ointment. People eat things that are so bland, like, no offense to chickens, but a chicken breast does not have much flavor. And if you were to even buy a domestic duck, and the dark meat on a domestic duck is much more flavorful, which some people will find not appealing. So it's interesting. The food decisions that society has generated in modern times, I'd say. I see a lot of people that eat like that, but I also have seen a big, strong push. You even see it on the front page of some of the national newspapers, where it's the in thing to go out and source your own wild proteins. There's more people getting into hunting now than ever before. Our hunter numbers in Alberta jumped, I think it was 38% last year. And a lot of that is youth hunters and female hunters and people that are trying to get back into it. So, hunting hasn't always been as vogue as it is right now, but sourcing natural protein seems to be very high on people's list. It's more palatable within our society.
And I suspect that there's probably something highly motivating about having unique and different food if you source it yourself. So that idea that, I caught this, I've prepared it, you'd be a lot more accepting of the unique flavors, and you'd consider them to be very positive. As I know some of the studies we've done, very positive sensory attributes, things that really drove liking for some of the different meat products were a mild flavor with a mild aftertaste, things that people characterize as sort of meaty, which really doesn't fit the description of game at all.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I looked you up online, and I looked at several of the studies that you've done, and we talked about this a little bit before the show here, but sensory comparisons between beef, horse, elk, and bison. To me, that would be a great study to be part of, because I'd be a willing participant to try any of them. But I wonder how many of our listeners would actually try horse, or are they right now screwing up their nose going, ooh, they eat a horse?
Yeah. And then that perception, that, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing that, is going to lead to probably some negative perceptions about the taste of the horse.
Yeah, so, and I think that's what happens when we introduce people to wild game, is that, they get this, ooh, that's a rabbit. Rabbits are here at Easter. We don't eat them unless they're chocolate.
Yes, they're my friends. The cartoon rabbit, My Little Pony. I mean, it's a tough sell. And I think that's maybe made more problematic by the fact that we often don't think about where our food comes from. You buy it in the grocery store, and it's all sort of clean and tidy and packaged for you. And to think that it did have 4 legs and a tail at one point is not a really comfortable sensation. So that would be another sort of attribute of acceptance, is your comfort level in knowing that once your food was living, how welcome you are to that fact. And I get the sense that hunters are really, really positive about that. It's a big cycle, and we're all part of it. Whereas if you're less comfortable with that, part of that might be simply that, that's just it's not a story I want to hear.
Yeah,
so there are different perspectives.
Yeah, and that just struck a nerve with me too, because I do all my own processing. So from field to freezer, we take care of our own meat. We age it. We have a cooler to hang it in. We make our own sausages, our own burger, and everything. But there's a huge sense of accomplishment doing it on your own. So I do understand why some people are trying to get into it, because there's a level of satisfaction that you do not understand or get by walking into a grocery store and buying a steak.
Yeah, exactly. So I would call you a highly food-involved person. So you're, as you pointed out, you're really into it in all aspects, from the harvest to getting it on your plate. And we have looked at consumers and their interest in food involvement, and whether they're interested even in shopping and preparation and cleaning up, searching for new recipes and things like that. And there are some individuals who are highly food involved, and they are, from our studies, more interested in trying bison and horse, which were the topics of our study. Whereas there were other individuals who did very, very little. So maybe classically individuals who buy semi-prepared and prepared foods or order frequently from Skip the Dishes, and they're not looking for a really rich and rewarding food experience, or their definition of a rich and rewarding food experience is one where they have little involvement. And they're maybe not expecting then a lot of exciting flavors and tastes in their food.
Yeah, that I'm just sitting here trying to think about that. It seems foreign to me to not be involved. I can't imagine buying everything that's already prepackaged and prepared for you, but maybe I'm naive. I'm sitting here listening to it going, how could people even afford that?
Yeah. Well, as my mother used to say, it takes all kinds of people to make a world go round.
Right.
But I would agree, food is such a glorious thing. Like, how could you not be involved? But then it's just not everybody's thing. And I think, there are so many reasons for that, which is probably, a whole other show with a psychologist or something, our busy lifestyles, our need for convenience. And one of the things about the pandemic that we hear a lot is that it's forced us to slow down a bit. And we've taken that opportunity to spend more time in the kitchen, learn new cooking skills and things like that. So maybe that will be a really positive influence on game harvesting, is this greater food involvement and willingness to spend the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you've looked at the Harvest Your Own website. There's a pile of information there on how to get started, what to do, and all kinds of recipes for every type of game we have in Alberta. So it's a great source of information.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
It's been a great topic for our podcast as well. Getting people on like yourself is always educational for me. I learn a lot, and I could probably talk to you for hours about some of the stuff you looked at. The horse, elk, bison study, if we went back to that for a minute, was there a preferred meat out of the four?
What we found was that individuals varied in what they preferred. So we had this group of individuals who they really appreciated mild flavor, mild taste, tender texture, and those were the individuals that tended to like the beef. And then there were other individuals who were, sort of okay with the beef, but they really enjoyed the elk. So while many people described it as having a bloody aftertaste or livery aftertaste, things that we might describe or consider to be negative attributes, there were people who really appreciated that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, everyone's palate is different, and we adapt, and I think we train our taste buds and our brain for eating specific types of foods, and we talked about that with chicken and other things, and I think horse is definitely on that list for North America. I still don't think I can think of a lot of different hunting people that I have shared meals with, and if I told them we were doing horse, they'd probably make some funny faces at me. So the perception still is there, and I remember when there was a news story that broke about a store that sells meatballs, and they were made out of horse because they're made in Europe, and there were people that were absolutely devastated that they'd eaten those. It wasn't the fact that they liked them and they taste good, it was they found out what was in it. We run across that as hunters all the time. I always tell people, don't try to trick people. Be upfront, be honest, let them try it on their own terms. But you don't want to cook a moose roast and serve it to somebody that doesn't want to eat wild game. whether they can taste the difference or not is irrelevant. It's just not a good way to introduce people to it.
Oh, exactly. And I wonder if the insects as food industry is experiencing the same phenomenon. There are all sorts of studies where you incorporate insects into a food product and you find out at what level people can perceive a difference, and that sort of reveal where you tell them, oh, you just ate something with insects and look at the effect.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah. I remember going into a candy store in Victoria, and they had different flavored dried crickets. You could get salt and vinegar or smoky barbecue, and there were bags of crickets, and the guy said they sold hundreds of them.
Did you buy some?
I didn't, but my son did, and I did try them. You would never know that it was an insect, more like a dried pea or almost like a nutty taste. But
that's really interesting.
A very unique snack indeed.
Yeah. So you're really uninhibited, which is really, when it comes to food, the rest I'm not going to comment on. I wouldn't know. But it's interesting because there's another thing that we look at, another sort of psychological dimension called food neophobia, which is if people are reluctant or sort of fearful to take on new food experiences. So very much that, I know what I like and I like what I know. And there are individuals who, when it comes to insects or game or something like that, would say, I'm happy with my chicken and beef. And so I just, I have a reluctance to try these other things. I'm a little fearful. And I just, I don't need them because I have these other options.
I run into those types of people. Regularly.
Yeah, I bet. And then variety seeking is something that's similar to that, where, again, people have settled into kind of an acceptable or accepted food routine that they're happy with. And they're really, they're not looking for anything different. Whereas you sound like you would be more of a person who says, I'm going to try something different today. Or if someone offered you something different, you would certainly take them up on it.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's funny. I think it depends who introduces you to foods as well. We talked briefly before the show here about texture, flavor, and cooking wild game is quite different than cooking domestic meats with fat in them. Cooking times are reduced, and if you overcook them, they're really not as palatable. I also run across a lot of people that were born and raised in northern Alberta on a farmstead, and they said they ate moose their whole life and they don't want to eat it anymore. But I think back to when I was a kid, my mom used to cook all our beef roast and deer roast and stuff well done as well. And she'll tell you today that that wasn't the best way to do it. And you can certainly change flavors and palatability just by learning how to cook them differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it takes a little bit of effort then to develop the appropriate techniques and to do things differently.
Oh, absolutely. And again, Harvest Your Own, we make sure that we put a lot of information up there about how to get your game from the field home and either in the freezer or on the table with proper techniques so that you make it as good of experience as possible. We want people to dive in and try it and enjoy it and want to go do more of it.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information to gain insight and knowledge. Head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
I think that information is really valuable for people, because you would think that there are really a lot of positive attributes about wild game. The fact that it's very natural and it's certainly lean and very healthy. Those are two big motivators for consumers when it comes to meat choices. So I guess you have to balance that with that, not knowing what to do with it and sort of connecting people to the resources.
Yeah, it is a big connection, and you're right about wild game. The nutritional value of it is a real bonus. It's a bonus to the people that are out there and can bring it home.
Oh, absolutely. It's so lean, and we have become very accustomed to um, kind of richer meats and things like that, things with a higher fat content. So I guess it's not only the flavor then of the muscle, but also flavor that's contributed to meat from the fat. And that would be a great influence on the texture. So the wild game, you can see, would be a very different eating experience. And
Right.
you've got to be open to that to accept it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often say that wild game is made for these high protein diets, the ketos and stuff like that, where it's they're low fat, high protein, and I think you were mentioning earlier that they're very high in omega-3s as well.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have much fat, but what's there is really quite healthful.
Right, the good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just looking at some of the comparisons, I believe you said that beef has up to 30% fat.
Regular ground beef does have 30% fat, so it's pretty high, so which is probably why a lot of people would go for lean ground beef, which in Canada is 17% fat,
Okay.
and then extra lean is 10%.
Wild game still falls well below that.
Oh, well below. So caribou and deer would be less than 5%, and then when you get into elk and moose, you're looking at less than 1%.
Wow. Yeah, that's a drastic difference, and it sort of reiterates to me why we cook them so differently. Those fats in domestic meats are harder to heat up. It's like insulation in your house; it keeps the heat out or the cold out, and it's harder to put on a grill and cook them through because of the fat content. And wild game just cooks so much faster because it's just a solid lean protein which absorbs the heat very quickly.
Yeah, so that would be another thing that's really, I guess, more different and challenging. Again, one of those things, if you're not food involved or not really into the preparation, just expecting to do what you usually do with conventional meat products, it would be a shocker, and you'd have a lot of well done game, which
Right.
then would be disappointing.
Absolutely, and with cooking any type of steak or roast or whatever, it's all about moisture management. The meat is very lean, so there's not a lot of moisture, and if you overcook it, you basically make it devoid of moisture, which would mean that it's tough. When you think of meat that doesn't have moisture in it, I think of jerky, and jerky is not a real tender piece of meat. It's flavorful with all the salts and stuff you put on it, but you want your prime cuts to be palatable and tender. In order to do that, you have to maintain the moisture in it.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump back a little bit. We were talking about perceptions of wild game and food, and people having basically a fear of different food too. A lot of that comes maybe from reality television. I think it started way back with Fear Factor, where people had to eat snakes or worms or crickets and bees or different things, and I'm sure everyone that watched the show was just squirming at home at the thought of it. But that's why they did it.
Oh yes, I think that's so true. And when you think about sort of how in some ways we've moved on, because something like insects are so much more acceptable, whereas on Fear Factor, you just couldn't imagine that someone would do that. And there are these different reality shows where people go around and try interesting and unusual things, and it's almost like it's not quite like skydiving, but you get excited because someone is doing something that seems so unusual. They dare to take on this challenge. And that's maybe not always a helpful perspective when it comes to food, because it suggests then that there's, a certain group or spectrum of foods that's very acceptable, and that eating outside of that is strange and unusual, and you must have to have a lot of courage or something like that to try them.
I think
which is an odd perspective.
It is, and I do think that's the message that was there. You had to have courage to step up and do this, and that's not the reality with wild game or even insects. Looking back at the fact that I ate salt and vinegar crickets, I didn't think I was courageous. I just didn't want to disappoint my son. I think it was the biggest part of it. I'd have been just as happy with a bag of chips, but the crickets were very unique.
So it's that motivation, right? You're motivated to support your son. And I guess as consumers, then we have to look at our motivations. The leanness of the meat, the healthiness, the willingness to try this new experience, looking at the unique flavor attributes as just unique, not different or bad. They've got to have all those motivators in place there. How you frame the experience.
Yes, it's interesting. I was up, friends of ours in the high Arctic got married, and we flew up and went to the wedding, and the local Inuit ladies drug in a number of tarps. One of them had beluga whale on it, and they had an ulu sitting there so you could go over and cut off a piece of fat and eat it, and there was a 45-gallon drum that was cut in half, and it had boiled caribou hinds in it. There was fermented walrus, some muktuk that was there that smelt a lot like Limburger cheese. But all of these things in the room, and there was a number. Well, the local people dove right in. It was an absolute delicacy and a treat, and it only came out at special occasions. So it all got used up and eaten. But the people visiting from around Canada that were attending the wedding weren't as anxious to go visit each food station.
Oh, stay with what we know.
Yeah, it was almost like a mini fear factor for some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that works out for those that really enjoyed it then, more for them.
Yes, absolutely. In North America, we really have a lot of tight control on our foods. We look at the domestic meat products we have, and hogs aren't killed and provided for human consumption because they have what is called boar taint. It makes them very strong and musky, and you can actually smell it when you're cooking it, and it's definitely there. I've even tried bacon made out of a breeding boar, and it definitely has a musky taste that is not overly palatable. So we're very careful in terms of how I don't know if select is the right word, but careful what we allow into the food market because people's palates aren't ready for everything. And I bring that up.
I think that's...
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that's so true in North America. We tend to like things generally fairly neutrally flavored. Even some of those strong cheeses, for example, you mentioned Limburger or maybe Gorgonzola and things like that. It's a real niche. It's not something that we've been brought up on. So I think in the food world, that is one of the sort of the considerations about North Americans is they tend to be very safe and not very adventurous in terms of selecting different flavors.
Right. We have to train our palates. Like you were saying, with young kids, you have to feed them Brussels sprouts 6 or 8 times before they might actually eat a whole one.
Mm-hmm. And that's when you have children, that's an easier situation to manage because you're in charge of what's served. So you can cook the broccoli and the Brussels sprouts and all those other strongly flavored vegetables and keep introducing them. But then as adults, I guess we often try something and then think, yeah, it just, it wasn't for me. And then we don't try it again.
Absolutely.
So that is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. We joked about this ahead of time too. It's a lot like wines. Younger people like the white, sweeter wines. And as you get older, you develop more of a palate for red wines. And I was always told by many people that you don't enjoy red wines till later in life when some of your taste buds start to die off. So, and you hadn't heard that, so it's kind of a unique story. I guess we'll have to try to dispel that, find out if it's a myth or not.
Well, there is some truth to that, that those strongly flavored foods for North Americans are, it takes a while to grow into them, like a coffee. And when I think about something like Scotch, you generally don't think of younger people drinking Scotch. It often typically has been, somebody older with a wool cardigan by the fire, right, or something like that.
Yes.
So maybe in that regard, the game meats are so unusual for people. It's really, it's not what they're expecting. And then we often just don't give things that second chance.
You know, the last 2 or 3 years, I've gone out to the waterfowl warm-up that the Alberta Conservation Association runs. It's a sporting clay event where people come and shoot clay targets, and I've done cooking demos. So most of the people that come there are also waterfowl hunters, and I've cooked ducks and geese, and I've done bulgogi tacos and kebabs and pulled goose and all kinds of different things. And I would say that 80% of the people there that are hunters didn't know ducks and geese could taste like that. Perceptions and really cooking and looking at wild game differently when you approach it to prepare it is to me the biggest things that people do wrong or right.
Did you grow up doing a lot of cooking?
I did a fair bit. I remember getting into trouble when I was a small person, and I would turn on the stove and make eggs and pancakes and stuff and try to treat mom and dad to breakfast in bed or something, and they were never too pleased that I had the stove on at that age. So I've always been interested in it. It's become a big part of my career now. I write recipe columns for at least 6 different publications and websites, so I'm continually trying to find new ways to enjoy and prepare wild game that is easy and so that people will want it again. It's been a unique challenge, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like you have such a positive attitude towards food and really healthy, what I would call variety seeking and food involvement, skills developed at an early age. It's all great.
Well, thank you. Have you eaten much wild game?
Not that much. Mostly when I was living in Ontario, and my husband was working in a lab, and the fellows there would go hunting, and they would have their share of the carcass, and they really didn't know what to do with it. And so I would cook it and invite them all out over, which worked really well actually for everybody. And I had a very small little cookbook that my father-in-law had given me from the 1970s, just a small paperback about how to cook game. And that was my go-to resource.
Nice. Yeah, I love reading cookbooks in general, just getting new ideas or, finding a new way to make a sauce or marinate meat or different cooking techniques. It's always fun to look at other people's perceptions of how to cook wild game and what they've shared.
Oh, I agree. And you take a little bit of information from this and that and then go on and create your own thing.
Yes, it's been a lot of fun. I would encourage you to stay in touch, and when COVID is well behind us, if you're ever interested in a wild game dinner, we could certainly host one out here. In the past, what I do is I call it a beast feast. At the end of the hunting season, we'd invite a bunch of friends over, and we'd cook up, something from different harvests during the year. We've had everything from mountain sheep and muskox and caribou to even cougar we had one year. So you never know what you're going to get at the beast feast, but it was interesting to see perceptions about that as well. One of our very good friends, the wife doesn't care for wild game too much, but the one thing that she liked the most and still raves about to this day was the cougar cutlets that we made. So approaching things with an open mind can be an eye-opener.
It is. It's a key to success in life, isn't it?
It certainly is.
And do you serve many vegetables at your beast feast?
Oh, absolutely. We actually grow a big garden and put up most of our own vegetables and stuff too, and we dehydrate a bunch of them and pick berries, makes jellies, jams, homemade wine, and everything else.
Wow, pretty self-sufficient.
Yes, if we were actually quarantined at home and not being, not able to go out and even get groceries, I think we'd be fine here for a long time. Anyways, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a lot of fun. It's been interesting, informative, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get requests to have you back on, because the topic is something that all of us deal with as hunters, is introducing other people to wild game, or even getting started ourselves and getting around these perceptions of what food is and textures and flavors and all the rest of it. So it's been a pleasure having you on, and I know that the listeners will enjoy the wealth of information that you brought to the table today.
Well, thank you, Brad. It's great to talk to you too. You know, it's always so nice when you meet a fellow foodie. It's a real treat.
Yes. Well, thanks, and we'll have you back real soon.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Take care.
Bye. We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.